Look, I appreciate the help, sweetheart, but this is a master's class, not a beginner's course. Why don't you go make sure the water coolers are full? This kind of math is probably a bit over your head. The words from Petty Officer First Class Marcus Thorne, lead instructor for the visiting SEAL team, were slick with condescending certainty, each syllable a small pat on the head. A ripple of uncomfortable chuckles spread through the half-dozen operators hunkered down behind their M210 enhanced sniper rifles, the heat haze of the Nevada desert warping their hardened silhouettes. They were gods of this domain, and the woman checking the electronic target's sensors was, in their eyes, merely a groundskeeper in their temple of precision. Sergeant Anna Reed didn't flinch. She didn't turn. She didn't offer so much as a tightened jaw. Her world remained the small diagnostic tablet in her hand, its screen reflecting the vast, empty blue of the sky. Her movements were economical, her focus absolute, a portrait of quiet competence amidst a chorus of casual arrogance. She tapped the screen, confirming the last sensor was calibrated, her knuckles smudged with grease and dust. For her, this was the job. The noise was just part of the environment, like the incessant wind or the biting sun. But from a shaded observation tower 200 yards away, a pair of powerful binoculars were trained not on the distant targets, but on her, on the way she stood, on the set of her shoulders, on the almost imperceptible way she shifted her weight, instinctively accounting for the gusting crosswind, as if she were about to take a shot herself. The man holding them, a civilian contractor named Sterling with eyes that had seen 3 decades of forgotten wars, lowered the binoculars slightly. A ghost of a memory flickered behind those eyes, the faint recognition of a stance he hadn't seen in over a decade. He'd seen that same economy of motion, that same profound stillness, in only a handful of people in his life. None of them were logistics sergeants. He raised the binoculars again, a knot of intrigue tightening in his gut. The SEALs were laughing, but the old warrior felt a familiar, cold thrill of anticipation. The desert was about to teach a lesson in humility. If you believe that true respect is earned in silence, not demanded with noise, type competence below. The condescension from Thorne wasn't a singular event. It was a climate. From a moment Sergeant Reed had arrived in the logistics truck, her small, unassuming frame dwarfed by the crates of ammunition and equipment, she had been treated as part of the scenery. Thorne, a man whose entire identity was forged in the crucible of BUD/S and validated on battlefields from the Horn of Africa to the Hindu Kush, saw the world through a simple, brutal lens. There were operators, and there was everyone else. To him, her sergeant stripes and her drab uniform signified a support role, a necessary but fundamentally inferior cog in the great machine of war. He saw a pencil pusher, a quartermaster, someone who counted bullets but had never truly understood their terrible final purpose. "Hey, Sergeant, you sure that thing is on?" He called out an hour earlier, his voice carrying an easy superiority as she worked on the target array a full mile downrange. "We're trying to hit a 10-inch plate out here, not the side of a barn. Make sure you plug it in all the way." His men had laughed then, too. Reed had simply given a thumbs up, her form a tiny, shimmering dot in his high-powered scope. Now, back at the firing line, the challenge was a new one, a final test for the SEALs' advanced training rotation. The target was a standard steel silhouette, but it was placed at an astonishing 2,200 yards. Compounding the difficulty was a notoriously unpredictable wind that whipped through the narrow desert canyon. A phenomenon the range regulars called the devil's sneeze. It swirled and eddied, changing direction and velocity second by second. It was a shot that bordered on impossible, a test not just of skill, but of an almost mystical connection between shooter, rifle, and environment. For 20 minutes, the operators had tried and failed. Their bullets, sent forth with world-class precision, were snatched by the wind and thrown wide, kicking up puffs of dust dozens of feet to the left or right of the target. Frustration was mounting, the easy camaraderie curdling into grunts of annoyance. Thorne himself, the master instructor, had missed 3 times, his face tightening with each silent, distant failure. He blamed the equipment, the atmospherics, the rifle. He never once blamed himself. It was in the middle of this mounting failure that Reed had walked back to the line, her task complete, intending only to report and depart. She stood a respectful distance away, waiting for a break in the firing, her shadow long in the late afternoon sun. Her stillness, her patient silence, seemed to irritate Thorne even more than his own misses. It was an unspoken judgment, an observer at his moment of fallibility. So he had turned on her, using her as a release valve for his own bruised ego, delivering the line about the water coolers. And Reed, in her profound and unnerving calm, had simply absorbed it. She did not defend herself. She did not offer a witty retort. She did not appeal to rank or regulation. She just stood there, waiting, her quiet presence a mirror that reflected Thorne's own loud, flapping arrogance back at him. It was a silence more powerful than any argument, a silence that held a deep and unsettling weight. The situation escalated not by design, but by the slow, grinding pressure of failure. Another SEAL, a younger operator named Diaz with a reputation for being a savant with wind calls, settled behind his rifle. He spent 5 full minutes studying the mirage through his scope, watching the heat waves dance and ripple. He consulted his Kestrel weather meter, plugged the data into his ballistic calculator, and muttered adjustments to his partner. He was a scientist of his craft, methodical and intense. Sending, he announced, his voice tight with focus. The rifle boomed, a deep, resonant crack that echoed off the canyon walls. For a full 3 seconds, the world seemed to hold its breath as the .338 Lapua Magnum round traced its invisible arc across the desert. A small explosion of dust erupted far downrange, a good 15 feet to the left of the steel plate. Diaz swore, a sharp, bitter curse. He racked the bolt and tried again, adjusting his hold, convinced he had solved the puzzle. The result was the same, only this time the miss was high and to the right. The wind was a ghost, a trickster, and it was making fools of them all. It was then that Sterling's voice, calm and authoritative, crackled over the small radio on Thorne's vest. "Pack it in, Thorne. The conditions are awash." No sense burning through more ammo. Thorne's jaw clenched. To be told to quit by the old contractor, especially in front of his men, was a particular kind of sting. He saw it as a judgment on their skills. "Negative, Sterling. We can make this shot." He transmitted back, his voice strained with defiance. He turned, his eyes scanning the line of his men, and then they landed on Reed. She was still there, a silent statue of patience. An idea, born of pure spite and frustration, bloomed in his mind. It was a way to deflect, to create a spectacle, to mock the very idea of their failure by inviting a complete amateur to try. "You know what?" Thorne announced, his voice dripping with theatrical sarcasm. "Maybe we're going about this all wrong. We've got a fresh set of eyes right here." He unslung his own rifle, the M210 that was his pride and joy, a weapon that cost more than a new car, and held it out toward Sergeant Reed. "Sergeant, you've been watching us struggle. Clearly you've got it all figured out. Show us how it's done." The other SEALs exchanged confused, amused glances. This was cruelty. It was a public shaming, a way to use her inevitable, embarrassing failure to soften the blow of their own. Reed looked at the rifle. She looked at Thorne's mocking face. For the first time, her expression changed. Not with fear, not with anger, but with a flicker of something unreadable, resignation, perhaps, or a deep, weary patience. She gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. She said nothing. She simply walked forward, her steps measured and deliberate, and took the rifle from his hands. The weight of it settled into her grasp, as if it were a familiar extension of her own body. The moment Sergeant Reed took the rifle, the atmosphere on the firing line shifted. The mocking amusement in the eyes of the SEALs died, replaced by a tense, uncertain curiosity. Her entire demeanor had transformed. The quiet, unassuming logistics sergeant was gone. In her place was a figure of absolute, unadulterated focus. She didn't immediately drop to the ground. Instead, she stood for a long moment, the rifle held loosely in her hands, and simply looked downrange. She wasn't looking at the target. She was looking at the entire world between here and there. Her eyes traced the flow of the wind, reading the subtle tells in the sway of distant creosote bushes, the dance of dust devils in the middle distance, the way the mirage flowed like water over the undulating terrain. She was not calculating. She was observing. She was listening to the desert's language. Thorn, expecting her to fumble or ask for instructions, watched with a growing sense of unease. Her confidence was not loud or boastful. It was a deep, quiet current that emanated from her very core. She knelt, not with the athletic speed of an operator, but with the deliberate, practiced grace of a master craftsman. She didn't use the attached bipod. Instead, she shrugged off the small, worn pack she always carried, a pack Thorn had assumed held her lunch and a paperback, and placed it on the ground, kneading it into a firm, stable rest for the rifle. It was an old-school technique, one favored by long-range purists for its superior stability. From a pocket, she produced a simple, well-worn leather pouch. She bit the end of a string with her teeth and pulled it open, pouring a small amount of fine, chalk-like powder into her palm. She held her hand up and let the wind take it, watching the white cloud drift and dissipate, her eyes tracking its path with serene intensity. She did this 3 times from 3 slightly different positions. She wasn't using a kestrel. She wasn't using a ballistic computer. She was using the wind itself to understand the wind. Finally, she settled behind the rifle, her body a study in perfect alignment. She pulled the stock in her shoulder, her cheek finding the stock weld with an intimacy that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. She didn't look through the scope yet. She closed her eyes. Her breathing, which had been steady, now deepened, slowing until it was almost imperceptible. She was finding her center, purging every distraction, until the only things that existed in the universe were her, the rifle, and the wind. Then her eyes opened. They were clear, calm, and utterly present. She peered through the high-powered optic. Her hand, steady as granite, made 2 small, precise clicks on the elevation turret and 1 on the windage knob. A final, deep breath. In. Hold. The world fell away. The shouts, the skepticism, the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes, all of it vanished. There was only the process. The rifle became a part of her, a conduit for her will. The trigger finger settled, taking up the slack. A gentle press, a release, so clean it was more like a thought than a physical action. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, a familiar and welcome jolt. The sound of the shot was different this time. It wasn't angry or frustrated. It was clean, final. It was the sound of a question being answered. The following 3 seconds were a pocket of suspended time, a vacuum in which the only thing moving was a 225-grain projectile, spinning at over 2,000 revolutions per second, on a journey across 1.5 miles of hostile air. On the firing line, everyone froze, their eyes instinctively glued to their own optics, watching for the telltale splash of impact. They saw nothing. No dust cloud to the left. No puff of dirt to the right. Nothing. For a heartbeat, Thorn felt a surge of vindicated relief. She had missed completely, the bullet sailing off into the vast emptiness of the desert. He opened his mouth to deliver the final, cutting remark that would cement his lesson. But the words never came. Instead, a sound reached them, traveling across the canyon on the fickle wind. It was not the soft thud of a bullet hitting earth. It was a sharp, distinct, and utterly unmistakable clang. A pure, metallic ring that sang of a direct hit on solid steel. A collective, involuntary gasp went through the assembled SEALs. Optics swiveled back to the target, focusing with desperate intensity. And there it was, a tiny, dark blemish, dead center on the steel silhouette, a perfect punctuation mark at the end of a sentence they hadn't even known was being written. The impossible shot, made on the first attempt, with no spotter, no electronic aids, and with another man's rifle. The silence that followed was no longer uncomfortable or mocking. It was a profound, deafening silence, thick with shock and disbelief. It was the sound of deeply held assumptions being shattered like glass. The operators looked from their scopes to Sergeant Reed, then back again. They looked at each other, their faces masks of stunned confusion. This was not possible. They were the best in the world. They had failed repeatedly. And this logistics sergeant, This woman they had dismissed as a support clerk had succeeded with an ease that bordered on contemptuous. Thorne was the most affected. He stood frozen, his mouth still slightly agape, the sarcastic words he'd prepared turning to ash on his tongue. He lowered his binoculars, his knuckles white. He looked at Reed, who was already calmly extracting the spent brass casing from the chamber. She didn't celebrate. She didn't smile. She didn't even look at them for validation. She simply placed the warm casing on the shooting mat, her movements as clean and precise as the shot itself. She began the process of clearing the weapon, her actions methodical and ingrained. To her, it seemed the event was already over. It was a task, and it was complete. Her lack of reaction was more damning than any boast could ever be. It communicated a truth so profound it left no room for argument. For her, a shot like that wasn't a miracle. It was just another day at the office. The impossible was her baseline. The spell of stunned silence was finally broken by the crunch of gravel. Every head turned towards the sound. Command Sergeant Major Rhett David Sterling was walking down from the observation tower, his stride unhurried but filled with an undeniable purpose. His face, a roadmap of hard-won experience, was unreadable, but his eyes were fixed on Sergeant Reed. The SEALs, including Thorne, instinctively straightened up. Sterling was a legend. He had been a ghost in the shadows of global conflicts before most of them had even enlisted. His approval was a currency more valuable than medals. He walked past the line of operators without a glance, his focus entirely on the quiet woman who was now wiping down Thorne's rifle with a small, oil-stained cloth. He stopped directly in front of her. Reed looked up, her expression calm, and simply met his gaze. Sterling didn't speak for a long moment. He just looked from her face to the M210 in her hands, and then to the small, worn pack she used as a rifle rest. He reached down and touched the pack, his fingers tracing the faded, almost invisible stenciling on the canvas. A call sign. Whisper a slow, profound wave of understanding washed over his face. He looked back at Reed, and his eyes were now filled with a deep, reverent respect. He stood up to his full height and executed a salute. It was not the casual gesture of a contractor. It was the crisp, formal salute of a command sergeant major to a fellow warrior, a sign of respect so profound that it sent a shockwave through the onlookers. "Apologies for not recognizing you sooner, ma'am." Sterling's voice was low, but it carried across the silent range with a weight of absolute authority. "It's been a long time." Reed returned the salute with a quiet nod. "It's just Sergeant Reed now, Sergeant Major. I'm in logistics." Sterling shook his head slowly. "You're never just anything, Anna." He turned to face the bewildered SEALs, his gaze sweeping over them before landing squarely on Thorne. "Petty Officer Thorne, you and your men have been trying for the last hour to hit a target at 2,200 yards. You failed. You called the conditions a wash. You assumed the problem was with the environment, with the equipment. You assumed it couldn't be done." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Your assumption was wrong. You weren't failing because the shot was impossible. You were failing because you are not the best long-range shooter on this mountain." He pointed a thumb at Reed. "And it's not even close." Thorne stared, his mind struggling to process the scene. The salute, the use of her first name, the title ma'am, none of it made sense. "Sergeant Major, I don't understand," Thorne finally managed to say, his voice hoarse. "Who is she?" Sterling's expression hardened. It was the look of a man about to pass a sentence. "Who is she?" he repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "Ignorance is not an excuse for disrespect, petty officer. But since you asked, I'll indulge you." He walked over to the range master's hardened laptop, which was connected to the secure military network. He typed a few commands, his fingers moving with practiced familiarity. A personnel file flickered onto the screen. He turned the laptop so everyone could see it. It was Sergeant Anna Reed's official record. But it wasn't the simple file of a logistics NCO. It was a heavily redacted document, with entire sections blacked out with the words classified, Tier 1, but what was visible was enough to paint a staggering picture. Sterling began to read from the screen, his voice like a hammer, striking an anvil with each new revelation. United States Army Marksmanship Unit, Fort Benning. Top graduate, sniper school, Class 04-08. Set 3 course records that still stand today. Special Operations Target Interdiction Course, Fort Bragg. Again, top graduate. Distinguished Rifleman Badge. President's 100 tab. He paused, looking at the stunned faces of the SEALs. That's the easy stuff. The stuff they let you see. He pointed to a redacted block of text. This part here? That's her time with a unit that doesn't officially exist. A special mission unit where she was the lead sniper for an operational detachment for 6 years. They sent her where people like you couldn't go, Thorn. They sent her to make shots that wars depended on. He scrolled down the page. Combat déploiement, 12. Confirmed engagements past 2,000 yards, 47. This one here, he tapped the screen, was a hostage rescue in the southern Philippines. Single shot, running target, through a bus window, at night, from a moving helicopter. A shot that the entire special operations community still talks about as a ghost shot, because they never found the shooter. He looked directly at Thorn, his eyes cold. She's not a logistics sergeant who got lucky. She is a living legend who decided she wanted a quiet life. She has forgotten more about long-range marksmanship than you and your entire team will ever know. You didn't just insult a fellow soldier. You insulted a master of your own craft. You stood on the range with a giant and treated her like a child because she wasn't loud, because she wasn't arrogant, and because she wasn't one of you. The story of what happened in the Nevada desert that afternoon did not stay in the desert. It spread, as such stories always do, not through official reports, but through the quiet, unofficial channels of the military grapevine. It started with the SEALs themselves. That evening, back in their barracks, the usual boisterous atmosphere of post-training banter was absent. There was only a quiet, contemplative mood. They spoke in low tones, replaying the events of the day, the impossible clang of the steel target echoing in their minds. Diaz, the wind-reading savant, just kept shaking his head, muttering, "I didn't even see the wind shift she played. She read a current inside the current." It's a different level. The story was passed to other teams, whispered in chow halls, and typed into secure forums where operators exchanged lore and lessons. The details became mythic. The distance grew with each telling. The wind became a hurricane. But the core truth remained the same. A quiet logistics sergeant had humbled a team of elite SEALs with a single, perfect shot. The name Anna Reed began to acquire a new, almost mythical status. People started digging, trying to find out more, but her official records were a fortress of blacked-out ink and need-to-know restrictions. Her legend grew in the absence of facts. She became known as the Ghost of Benning, or more simply, the Janitor, a nod to the unassuming way she cleaned up a mess that no one else could handle. For Marcus Thorn, the experience was transformative. The foundation of his identity, built on the certainty of his own elite status, had been fractured. For 2 days, he was silent and withdrawn. He replayed his own words, his condescending tone, his smug arrogance, and felt a profound and searing shame. He had been so sure of his world, so certain of the hierarchy of skill and worth. He had judged a book by its cover and discovered that the book was a sacred text. On the 3rd day, he sought her out. He found her not on the range, but in a cavernous supply warehouse, methodically inventorying medical kits with the same quiet focus she'd shown behind a rifle. He stood before her, stripped of all his usual swagger, and for the first time, he saw her not as a rank or a role, but as a person. "Sergeant Reed," he began, his voice unsteady. I came to apologize. What I said on the range was out of line. It was unprofessional, and it was disrespectful. There's no excuse for it." Reed paused her work, looking up at him. Her eyes held no anger, no triumph, just a calm, steady acceptance. "We all make assumptions, petty officer," she said, her voice soft. "The important thing is what we do after we learn we're wrong." Thorn nodded, humbled by her grace. "I'd like to learn," he said, the words costing his ego more than any physical hardship ever had. "If you'd be willing to teach me what you saw out there, what you read in the wind." A small, rare smile touched Reed's lips. "Be at range 4 tomorrow at 0500. Bring a notepad. We'll start with the basics." The lesson Thorn learned that day, and in the early mornings that followed, was far more profound than the mechanics of long-range shooting. Sergeant Reed taught him about a different kind of strength, a philosophy of quiet professionalism that had been utterly alien to his world of loud, aggressive excellence. She taught him that true confidence doesn't need to announce itself. It is calm, it is patient, and it is proven through action, not assertion. She showed him how the loudest person in the room is often the most insecure, using volume to mask a lack of depth. Her own silence, he came to realize, was not a sign of weakness or timidity. It was the result of a profound inner peace, a deep-seated knowledge of her own capabilities that required no external validation. She didn't need to tell people she was good. Her actions spoke with a clarity that no boast could ever match. Her mentorship was as precise and economical as her shooting. She wasted no words. She corrected his stance with a small, gentle pressure on his shoulder. She taught him to read the mirage not as an obstacle, but as a roadmap of the wind's journey. She encouraged him to put away his electronics and learn to use the natural world as his primary tool. "The rifle is honest," she told him one morning, as the sun crested the mountains, painting the desert in hues of orange and purple. "It would do exactly what you tell it to do. If the shot fails, the mistake is yours. You misread the wind, you rush the trigger, you are impatient. Blaming the tool is a failure of character." The story of their unlikely mentorship also began to spread, adding another layer to the growing legend. It became a parable about humility and the true meaning of being an elite warrior. The firing point where she had taken a shot was unofficially renamed Reed's Perch. New shooters arriving at the range would be taken there, and the range master would tell them the story, pointing to the distant, paint-chipped steel target. The lesson was clear: never underestimate anyone. Respect is the default position. Competence can be found in the most unexpected places. Thorne, for his part, became a better instructor and a better leader. He started listening more than he spoke. He began to look for the quiet professionals in his own ranks, the ones who did the work without needing the credit. He learned to see strength in humility and wisdom in silence. A photograph was taken one day by Sterling, a candid shot of Reed and Thorne on the range, her pointing towards the distant mountains, him listening with rapt attention. Sterling pinned it to the main bulletin board at the range headquarters. Underneath it, he wrote a single sentence: "The master is a perpetual student." That photograph became an iconic image, a symbol of a paradigm shift, a quiet revolution that began with a single, condescending remark and ended with a lesson that would echo for a generation of warriors. Years passed. The dust of that Nevada range settled, was kicked up again, and settled once more. New faces, new technologies, and new challenges came and went. But the story of Sergeant Anna Reed endured. It became a foundational piece of institutional folklore, a story told to new SEAL candidates at BUD/S and to young Army snipers at Fort Benning. It was a mandatory lesson in the culture of special operations, a reminder that the most dangerous weapon on any battlefield is not the rifle, but the quiet professional behind it. Marcus Thorne rose through the ranks, eventually becoming a Master Chief, in charge of all training for his command. He was known as a demanding but fair leader, a man who valued humility and competence above all else. He made it a point to personally tell Reed's story to every new class of operators that passed through his command. He would stand before them, his presence radiating a hard-won wisdom, and he would tell them about his own arrogance, his own failure of judgment. He used his own mistake as his most powerful teaching tool. "I was a good operator," he would tell them, his voice resonating with sincerity. "I thought that made me a good judge of character. I was wrong. The most lethal person I ever met was a woman who spent her days counting inventory and her nights rewriting the laws of physics. She taught me that the skills that make you a great warrior, discipline, focus, precision, have nothing to do with ego. Ego is a liability. It makes you loud when you should be quiet. It makes you blind when you need to see." The legacy of that day was not a plaque on a wall or a record in a book. It was a change in culture. It was the slight hesitation a seasoned operator might feel before dismissing someone in a support role. It was the extra attention a young leader might pay to the quietest member of their team. It was the understanding that true strength doesn't need a uniform or a title to be recognized. It has a weight and a presence all its own. Reed herself eventually retired, disappearing back into the quiet life she had always wanted. She left behind no forwarding address, no long list of accolades. Her legacy was not in what she left behind, but in what she set in motion, a quiet ripple of respect and humility that spread through a community built on strength, reminding them that the most profound strength is the one that doesn't need to speak its own name. The echo of that single, perfect shot continues to resonate, a timeless lesson etched into the very soul of the warrior ethos. It serves as a permanent reminder that competence is a universal language, spoken not with the tongue, but through the silent, undeniable grammar of action. It teaches that assumptions are the enemy of wisdom, and that prejudice is a self-inflicted blindness that prevents us from seeing the giants who walk among us in quiet humility. The story of Reed's Perch became more than just a tale of a remarkable shot. It became a philosophical touchstone. It illustrates a fundamental truth. The world is full of masters disguised as apprentices, of legends hidden within the mundane. They're the quiet professionals, the silent experts who seek neither fame nor recognition, content in the simple, profound satisfaction of a job done to the highest possible standard. Their reward is not applause, but the quiet hum of a well-oiled machine, the clean data on a screen, the perfect hole in a distant piece of steel. They are the foundation upon which the spectacular feats of others are built, the invisible architects of victory. This is the enduring power of the quiet professional. They force us to look deeper, past the superficial markers of rank, title, and reputation, and to judge others based on the content of their character and the quality of their work. They remind us that the measure of a person is not the volume of their voice, but the depth of their skill and the steadiness of their hand. True legacy isn't about the stories they tell about you when you're gone. It's about the standards you inspire in others while you are here. It's about the lessons that outlive the lesson giver. It's about a culture of quiet excellence that continues to move forward, long after the rifle has been cleaned and put away, carried on by those who were wise enough to listen to the silence. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where a professional's actions define their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.